Hello, I'm Kaya, the Legends Teller. And today I'm going to take you to a time when gods walked among the clouds and men crawled in the darkness. A time when a single act of compassion forever changed the fate of humanity. This is the story of Prometheus, the titan who dared to defy Zeus himself to bestow upon mortals a gift that would transform them from primitive creatures into architects of civilization. If this story has already piqued your curiosity, leave your like now. It helps me a lot to continue bringing these legends to you. Imagine for a moment the world before fire. Imagine humanity huddled in caves, shivering with cold as night stretched like a merciless blanket over the earth. Humans possessed almost nothing of what we now consider basic for survival. They knew no agriculture. They ate only what nature provided, fighting for scraps with wild animals. They had no mastery of metallurgy. Their tools were rough stones, broken branches, and the bones of dead animals. At night, as the sun disappeared below the horizon, they huddled together, trying to share what little heat their bodies could produce. The cold penetrated to the bone. The darkness brought with it predators with glowing eyes and sharp fangs. And they could do nothing but wait for dawn to come before death found them. It was a time when humanity lived almost like animals, but with one cruel difference. They were aware of their fragility. They knew they were defenseless. They felt fear, hopelessness, the anguish of those who understand their own smallness in the face of a hostile universe. From high above Olympus, the gods watched this struggle for survival with an indifference bordering on disdain. To Zeus and his immortal brethren, mortals were nothing more than interesting creatures, perhaps amusing in their vulnerability, but certainly not worthy of special care. The gods had their own interests, their own disputes, their own pleasures. Human suffering was just another detail in the vastness of creation. But there was one among the immortals who could not look away from this silent tragedy. Prometheus was no Olympian god. He was a titan, descended from the previous generation of deities. His name carried within it a prophecy. He who foresees, he who thinks beforehand. And this ability to see beyond the immediate present allowed him to perceive something that escaped the other immortals. Prometheus saw in human beings not just fragile and primitive creatures. He saw potential. He saw dormant intelligence. He saw hearts capable of love, minds capable of creation, hands capable of transforming the world. He observed how mortals helped one another in times of danger, how they cared for their children even when it meant starvation, how they tried, with minimal resources, to build something better for future generations. They could be so much more, Prometheus thought, as he watched a human family basking in the morning sun after a night of bitter cold. If only they had the right tools. If only they possessed what we immortals take for granted. And then his eyes turned to the sacred fire that burned eternally on the altars of Olympus. There lay the answer. Fire wasn't just light and heat, it was transformation. It was the power to cook food, making it more nutritious and safe. It was the ability to shape metals, creating tools and weapons. It was protection from the predators of the night. It was the beating heart of every possible civilization. But fire belonged to the gods. It was a symbol of their power, a mark of their supremacy. Zeus had decided that mortals should never possess it, not out of deliberate cruelty, but as a matter of cosmic order. Every species had its place. Every creature had its limits. The gods ruled, mortals obeyed. Granting them fire would alter this fundamental order. Prometheus, however, couldn't accept this cold logic. Compassion grew in his immortal heart like an inextinguishable flame. He saw the unnecessary suffering, the premature death, the wasted potential that repeated itself generation after generation. And he made a decision that would change not only the fate of humanity, but also seal his own destiny for all eternity. Night after night, the Titan observed the rhythms of Olympus. He studied the movements of the divine guards, memorized their moments of greatest distraction, and identified the least guarded routes. His superior intelligence, that same ability to foresee that gave rise to his name, was fully applied to this audacious plan. And then the chosen night arrived, a moonless night when the shadows were thickest and the gods retreated to their chambers to rest. Prometheus approached the altar where the sacred fire burned, eternal, untouchable. His hands trembled not from fear, but from the magnitude of what he was about to do. He had prepared a hollow stem of ferula, a plant known for its ability to preserve embers for long periods. With infinite care, he took a small spark of divine fire and hid it within the stem. The flame was tiny, almost imperceptible, but it carried within it the power to transform an entire world. With his heart beating more than it had ever done in his immortal existence, Prometheus walked through the silent corridors of Olympus. The divine spark pulsed within the ferula stem, warm against his chest, as if it carried not only fire, but all the hope of humanity. Every step was calculated. Every shadow was his ally. He knew there would be no second chance. The descent from Olympus to the mortal world had never seemed so long. Prometheus soared through the clouds, but he felt as if every beat of his wings echoed through the heavens, announcing his transgression to all the gods. Guilt and determination warred within him, not the guilt of stealing, but the knowledge that he was crossing a line from which he could never return. When he finally arrived in the world of men, dawn painted the horizon with rosy hues. Prometheus chose a tribe he had observed for months, a people who were especially kind to one another, who cared for the elderly and protected children even when it meant personal sacrifice. If anyone deserved to receive the divine gift, it was they. The family slept huddled together at the mouth of a shallow cave. The father's face was scarred from fights with wild animals. The mother held a small child to her chest, trying to warm him with her own body. Two older children huddled against each other, shivering even in their sleep. Prometheus approached silently and lit a small pile of dry twigs he had prepared. The first flame flickered, fragile as human life, but soon grew stronger. The heat began to spread. Golden light danced on the cave walls. The father was the first to awaken. His eyes opened slowly, still heavy with sleep, but soon widened in astonishment. He had never seen anything like it. The light didn't come from the sun, nor the stars, nor the moon. It came from something that seemed alive, moving and crackling with soft, hypnotic sounds. What is this?" he whispered, gently waking his wife. She opened her eyes and was speechless. The warmth touched her face like a gentle caress. For the first time in her life, she felt warmth in the early morning. The children woke one by one, drawn by the new light. Prometheus remained hidden, observing that sacred moment. He watched as amazement turned to curiosity, curiosity to enchantment. The man reached out toward the flames, feeling the heat without being burned. The woman held the small child close, and the baby stopped crying for the first time in days, warm and comforted. "It's like the sun has come down to us," she murmured, tears in her eyes. But the true miracle was just beginning. As the hours passed, other families in the tribe began to awaken and approach. The news spread like wildfire. Soon a crowd gathered around the sacred flame, everyone watching with reverence and awe at this inexplicable phenomenon. One of the older men, who had survived many cruel winters, approached, shivering. Not from the cold, but from emotion. "I've never seen anything like this in all my years," he said. "It's as if the gods themselves have sent us a gift." And he was right, although he didn't know how close to the truth his intuition was. Prometheus taught them, whispering knowledge in their dreams, how to keep the flame burning, how to feed it with dry wood, how to protect it from wind and rain, how to share it without losing it, the magical miracle that one flame can generate 1,000 others without diminishing. In the days that followed, the transformation was extraordinary. The first discovery was obvious: warmth. For the first time in their lives, these people slept truly warm. The nighttime cold, which had previously been a sentence of suffering, became just another minor inconvenience. But they soon discovered something even more revolutionary. When a piece of meat accidentally fell near the flames, the aroma that spread was unprecedented and irresistible. The cooked meat not only tasted different, it was easier to chew, more nutritious, and safer to eat. Fire had become humanity's first chef. Children, with their natural curiosity, were the first to experiment. They discovered that certain roots were delicious when roasted over coals, that some hard grains became soft and flavorful when exposed to heat. The human diet expanded dramatically in a matter of weeks, and then came the discovery that would change everything. Fire scares away wild animals. The first night they kept the campfire burning all night. No predators approached. The glowing eyes that used to circle the camp, waiting for a moment of vulnerability, simply disappeared. Humanity had discovered its first truly effective weapon. Weeks turned into months. The knowledge of fire spread from tribe to tribe, crossing mountains and rivers. Wherever it arrived, it brought with it a fundamental transformation. Humans began to emerge from their caves. They built the first open-air dwellings, protected by the magical circle of light and heat. They discovered that certain types of stone, when heated and cooled rapidly, split in useful ways, creating sharper, more efficient tools. Metallurgy was still a distant prospect, but the first steps of human technology were being taken around sacred fires. But perhaps the most profound change was social. Fire became the heart of communities. People gathered around it, not only to keep warm, but to talk, to tell stories, to strengthen the bonds that united them. There were born the first songs, the first legends, the first collective dreams of a better future. And from high up on Olympus, Zeus watched everything with growing irritation. The Lord of the gods was not stupid. He sensed the changes in the mortal world. He saw the smoke rising from 1,000 fires where before there was only darkness. He heard the laughter of children who no longer cried from the cold. He felt the very fabric of reality shifting as mortals acquired powers that once belonged only to immortals. And Zeus knew exactly who was responsible for this unauthorized transformation. Zeus's discovery wasn't a sudden moment of revelation. It was a crescendo of irritation that turned to suspicion, then certainty, and finally exploded into a fury that made the very foundations of Olympus tremble. First came the reports from the lesser gods. Hermes, in his travels through the mortal world, had noticed something strange. "Father," he said, arriving breathlessly at Zeus's throne, "there's something different down there. The mortals, they have light at night, and heat, and the smell." He paused, trying to find words. "The smell of burning flesh rises from their villages." Zeus frowned, but initially dismissed it as a matter of course. Mortals always found creative ways to survive. Perhaps they'd discovered some new technique with hot stones or something similar. But then Artemis arrived with her own report. The goddess of the hunt was visibly disturbed. "Wild animals are changing their patterns," she said. "They avoid certain areas where they once hunted freely. It's as if something is keeping them away, something that terrifies them." Apollo was next. The sun god observed the world from a unique perspective and had noticed something unsettling. "There are points of light that shouldn't be there," he reported. "During the night when my solar chariot has passed, I still see scattered glows across the earth. Small but constant, as if what?" Zeus asked, his voice already thick with dangerous tension. as if pieces of sacred fire had been scattered across the mortal world. The silence that followed on Olympus was absolute. Zeus slowly rose from his throne, and the air around him began to crackle with electricity. His eyes, normally blue as the serene sky, darkened until they became black as a storm. "Impossible," he murmured, but his voice trembled not with doubt but with a rising anger. "No one would dare!" But even as he spoke these words, Zeus knew exactly who would dare. There was only one among all the immortals who possessed both the compassion to care for mortals and the intelligence to plan such an audacious theft: Prometheus. Zeus summoned the Titan immediately. When Prometheus appeared before the divine throne, his posture was erect, his eyes clear, but there was something in them that confirmed the king of the gods' worst suspicions. It wasn't guilt, it was determination. It wasn't regret, it was quiet pride. "Prometheus!" Zeus's voice echoed off the marble columns of Olympus, carrying an authority that made mountains tremble. "Explain to me the reports I've been receiving. Explain to me why mortals possess something that should never be in their hands." The Titan lifted his chin. He had known this moment would come. He had been preparing for it since the night of the robbery. "I gave them the fire," he said simply, bluntly, without apology. Words fell across the great hall like stones thrown into a perfectly calm lake. The echoes lingered, and with each repetition, Zeus's fury grew exponentially. "You gave them fire." Each word was spoken as if it were a death sentence. "The sacred fire, the symbol of divine power, the element that separated gods from mortals. You simply gave it." "Yes," Prometheus replied, and his voice didn't waver for an instant. "And I would do it again." This last statement was the final straw. Zeus exploded in a fury unprecedented in the history of the cosmos. Lightning spontaneously formed around him. The sky over Olympus darkened instantly. Storms began to form in every corner of the world, as if nature itself responded to its lord's wrath. "You would do it again?" Zeus roared, his voice echoing from the depths of Tartarus to the highest peaks of Earth's mountains. "You have the audacity to defy me, to break the cosmic order, to give mortals powers they don't deserve, and yet you say you would do it again?" "Mortals do deserve it," Prometheus replied, maintaining his composure even in the face of the storm of divine fury. "They deserve the chance to grow, to evolve, to become more than just creatures crawling in the darkness. You created them with intelligence, Zeus. Why condemn them to never use it fully?" Zeus's response didn't come in words. It came in action. With a wave of his hand, Prometheus was instantly captured by invisible currents of divine energy. The Titan didn't resist. He knew it would be futile, but he also knew his resistance wasn't based on physical strength. He was convinced he had done the right thing. "Very well, Prometheus," Zeus said, his voice now dangerously calm, even more terrifying than his screams of rage. "You chose mortals over the gods. You chose to break the laws that govern the universe. So you will pay for that choice, and your payment will be a lesson to anyone who would consider following your example." The punishment Zeus devised was designed not only to make Prometheus suffer, but to break his spirit. The king of the gods wanted the Titan to repent, to beg forgiveness, to serve as an example of submission for all other immortals. Zeus summoned his most obedient servants. Kratos, the embodiment of brute strength, and Baia, the incarnation of violence, appeared instantly. With them came Hephaestus, the blacksmith god, carrying chains he had forged specifically for this occasion. Chains made of a divine metal that not even a Titan could break. "Take him to the Caucasus," Zeus commanded, "to the highest, most desolate, most inaccessible peak. Chain him to the most solid rock you can find, and make sure he can never, ever break free." The journey to the Caucasus was silent. Prometheus didn't protest, didn't plead, didn't try to argue. He watched the world pass beneath him, seeing the tiny lights of human fires dotting the nightscape like earthly stars. Each flame was proof that his sacrifice had been worth it. The peak chosen for their prison was a monument to desolation. Icy winds blew constantly, carrying snow and ice. No plants grew there. No animals ventured to those heights. It was a place where even hope seemed to freeze to death. Hephaestus, with tears in his eyes because he respected Prometheus, forged the chains directly into the rock. Each link was welded with divine fire, creating shackles that became part of the mountain itself. Prometheus's arms were extended and bound. His legs were immobilized. He became part of the rocky landscape, condemned to eternal immobility. But Zeus wasn't finished yet. Immobility was only the beginning of the punishment. The real torment was yet to come. Every morning, Zeus declared, his voice echoing across the desert mountains, "My sacred eagle will come to you, and every morning it will devour your liver. And every night, because you are immortal, your liver will regenerate. And the next day, the cycle will repeat, forever." And so began Prometheus's torment. Day after day, century after century, Zeus's gigantic eagle descended from the sky. Its talons dug into the Titan's body. Its sharp beak tore at his immortal flesh. And Prometheus endured, without screaming, without crying, without begging for mercy. At night, as the pain subsided and his body healed, Prometheus gazed at the distant horizon. Down below, scattered across the earth, thousands of bonfires glowed in the darkness. Humanity grew, learned, and evolved. Its cities expanded. Its technologies perfected. Its civilization flourished. And Prometheus smiled. The years piled up over the Caucasus like layers of eternal snow. 10 years turned into 100. 100 became 1,000. And Prometheus remained there, chained to the rock, witnessing the relentless passage of time through the pain that repeated itself day after day, without variation, without mercy. For an immortal being, time carries a different weight than it does for mortals. Each day is not just a day. It is a complete eternity of experiences, thoughts, sensations. Prometheus lived thousands of eternities on that lonely peak, and each one began with the terrifying sound of eagle wings cutting through the icy mountain wind. She always arrived with the first ray of sunlight. Prometheus learned to recognize that exact moment, not by light, but by sound. First, it was just a distant whisper in the sky. Then the powerful beat of approaching wings. Then the dark shadow that covered her face for an instant before the talons sank into her chest. The pain was indescribable, not just physical, but existential. With each peck, Prometheus felt not just his flesh being torn, but his very essence being devoured piece by piece. The liver in Greek mythology was considered the seat of emotions and desires. Zeus had chosen this particular organ for good reason. It was as if, day after day, the eagle devoured Prometheus's capacity for hope. But something extraordinary happened during these torture sessions. Prometheus discovered that pain can be a cruel teacher, but it can also be a strengthener of the soul. With each day he endured without breaking, his resolve grew stronger. With each morning he faced the eagle without asking for mercy. His conviction that he had done the right thing deepened. During the nights, as his body slowly regenerated, Prometheus became a privileged observer of human evolution. From the heights of the Caucasus, he could see beyond the mountains, beyond the horizons, reaching with his divine vision the farthest corners of the world. And what he saw filled him with a silent pride that no torture could erase. Humanity had not only survived with fire, it had prospered in ways that not even Prometheus, with all his foresight, had fully imagined. The first villages became cities. Cities became entire civilizations. Simple fires became sophisticated furnaces where humans learned to forge bronze, then iron, creating ever more elaborate tools. Prometheus witnessed the birth of planned agriculture, when humans realized they could burn forests in a controlled manner to create fertile fields. He witnessed the development of pottery, when they discovered that molded and fired clay became durable and useful vessels. He observed the first vessels being built from fire-treated wood, allowing humans to navigate previously impassable seas. But more than technical achievements, Prometheus was moved by the achievements of the human spirit. He witnessed the birth of the first schools, where knowledge was preserved and transmitted around campfires that lit up young faces eager to learn. He witnessed the development of the first art forms, when humans discovered they could use burning charcoal to make drawings on cave walls, recording their stories for future generations. He witnessed the birth of philosophy, when men began to sit around the fire, not just to warm themselves, but to ask profound questions about the meaning of life, about right and wrong, about humanity's place in the cosmos. And he smiled when he realized that some of these conversations came very close to understanding truths that the gods themselves knew. The seasons alternated around them. Springs brought melting snow that trickled down the rocks. Summers slightly warmed the frigid high-altitude air. Autumns painted the distant mountains golden. Winters covered everything in a white blanket that seemed to erase any sign of life. But Prometheus remained, immortal, incorruptible, unbreakable. There were moments of weakness, of course. Moments when loneliness weighed more heavily than physical pain. Moments when he wondered if Zeus wasn't right, if mortals truly deserved all this suffering. Moments when the temptation to ask for forgiveness, to beg for mercy, almost overcame him. But then he would look to the horizon and see a new city shining in the distance, lit by thousands of torches and bonfires. Or he would watch a caravan of traders crossing a desert, guided by lanterns that made nighttime travel possible. Or he would behold a lone ship sailing through the darkness, its sail lit by torches that allowed sailors to continue their journey even when the stars were obscured by clouds. And then Prometheus remembered why he was there. It wasn't just because of the fire he had given to mankind. It was because of what that fire represented. The ability to grow, to learn, to become more than circumstances allowed, to transform limitations into possibilities. Centuries passed. Zeus occasionally sent messengers to check if Prometheus was ready to bow, to ask for forgiveness, to acknowledge his error. The response was always the same, a dignified silence that spoke louder than any words. And then, on a morning that started like any other, something different happened. The eagle had just finished its daily torture ritual and flown back to Olympus. Prometheus was in the midst of the painful process of regeneration when he heard footsteps. Not the light steps of a divine creature, but the firm, heavy tread of someone walking with determination over difficult terrain. Prometheus lifted his head in surprise. In all the centuries of his imprisonment, no living being had ventured to those desolate heights. Who would be brave or foolish enough to scale the most dangerous peak in the Caucasus? The answer came when a figure emerged from the rocks. It was a man, but clearly no ordinary mortal. His stature was imposing, his muscles developed in a way that suggested superhuman strength. He carried a bow on his back and a lion's skin draped over his shoulders. His eyes had the special glow that indicated divine blood coursing through his veins. "Prometheus," said the newcomer, his voice echoing across the silent mountains. "I am Hercules, son of Zeus." The chained titan studied the hero curiously. He had heard of him, obviously. Hercules' exploits were legendary even among the immortals. But what was the son of Zeus doing there, in the most desolate place on earth? "I came here to fulfill my 11th labor," Hercules continued, approaching the chains that bound Prometheus. "But seeing you like this..." He paused, noting the torture marks on the Titan's body. "I realize there is a more important task to be done." Hercules drew an arrow from his quiver and aimed it skyward. Zeus's eagle was still not far away, flying slowly back to Olympus, satisfied with another day's work accomplished. "Is she coming back tomorrow?" asked Hercules. "Every day for centuries," Prometheus replied, his voice hoarse from so long without conversation. "No more," said Hercules, and he took off. The arrow flew through the sky with divine precision. The sacred eagle, symbol of Zeus's power, fell from the heights like a stone, its golden wings spreading uselessly against the wind. The silence that followed was unlike any other silence Prometheus had known in his captivity. It was the silence of approaching freedom. With the death of the sacred eagle, something fundamental changed in the atmosphere of the Caucasus. The air, which for centuries had been charged with tension and anticipated grief, suddenly became lighter. The mountains themselves seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, as if they too had been freed from an ancient curse. Hercules approached the chains that bound Prometheus with a determination that came not only from his legendary strength, but from something deeper. A genuine outrage at the injustice he witnessed. Those chains, forged by Hephaestus from the strongest materials in the cosmos, had been made to be unbreakable, but Hercules had faced the impossible so many times that he no longer believed in that word. "This is going to hurt," he warned, gripping the first chain with both hands. "No more than the last 30,000 years, Prometheus replied. And for the first time in millennia, there was something like humor in his voice. Hercules pulled. The muscles in his arms tensed. The veins on his forehead bulged, and a sharp metallic sound echoed across the mountains. The chain resisted, then groaned, then broke with a crack that could be heard even in the most distant valleys. One by one, the other chains were broken. With each link that fell apart, Prometheus felt as if part of his soul were being freed along with it. When the last shackle finally broke, he stood motionless for a few moments, almost unable to believe he could move his arms freely. "Why did you do this?" Prometheus asked, slowly flexing his fingers, which had been stiff for so long. "You are the son of Zeus. This goes against your father's will." Hercules sat on a nearby rock, watching the Titan slowly recover from his release. "My father did many things I don't agree with," he said, with an honesty that surprised Prometheus. "And this punishment has lasted too long. You gave men fire, and they built entire civilizations with it. Where is the crime in that?" Prometheus looked to the horizon, where the sun was beginning to set, dyeing the clouds gold and red. It was the first time in millennia that he could contemplate a sunset without the certainty that the next morning would bring new torture. "The crime," he said slowly, "was defying the established order. It was believing that mortals deserved more than they were given. It was choosing compassion over obedience." "And you regret it?" Prometheus smiled, a small but genuine smile. "Look down there," he said, pointing to the distant valley where tiny lights were beginning to appear as the towns settled in for the night. Each of those lights is a family warming themselves around a fire. They are people cooking their meals, telling stories to their children, forging tools that will make their lives easier. How could I regret that? Hercules followed her gaze and remained silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice carried genuine admiration. "You have endured 3 millennia of torture by mortals, and they don't even know your name." "You don't need to know," Prometheus replied, slowly rising from the rock where he had been chained for so long. "The fire is still burning. That is enough." But there was a melancholy in his words that Hercules didn't miss. The hero had freed the Titan from his physical chains, but the emotional ones were more complex. Prometheus would forever bear the scars of that experience. Not just the scars on his body, but the scars on the soul of someone who sacrificed everything and received only oblivion in return. "What are you going to do now?" Hercules asked. Prometheus contemplated the question for a long time. He was free, but free for what? The world had changed drastically during his imprisonment. Humanity no longer needed his direct protection. It had learned to stand on its own 2 feet. The other Titans had either been defeated or resigned to their fate. Their place in the cosmos had become uncertain. I don't know, he admitted. For so long, my existence has been about enduring punishment. Now that it's over, it's like I have to learn to live again. Hercules nodded understandingly. He himself knew what it felt like to not know who he was beyond his labors and trials. Perhaps, he said, that's the hardest part of freedom, figuring out what to do with it. The two remained there as night fell completely over the mountains. Prometheus watched the stars, which seemed brighter than he remembered, while Hercules kept a silent vigil beside him. It was a strange and precious moment. 2 extraordinary beings sharing the loneliness of those who carried burdens few could comprehend. When they finally rose to leave, Prometheus took one last look at the rock that had been his prison. The marks of the chains were still there, deep grooves in the stone that would forever remain as a testament to his sacrifice. "Thank you," he said to Hercules, but the words seemed insufficient to express the magnitude of his gratitude. "Thank you," Hercules replied, "for reminding me that sometimes it's worth defying even the gods when it comes to doing what's right." And so Prometheus descended from the Caucasus, free but carrying within him something that no liberation could fully heal. He had given his all for mortals, had endured centuries of punishment for them, and in the end, his reward was the silence of those who benefited from his sacrifice without ever knowing he existed. But when he looked at the bonfires scattered across the world, the cities lit in the darkness, the ships sailing through the night guided by lanterns, Prometheus knew it had been worth it. The fire he had given to mankind was not just fire. It was progress. It was knowledge. It was the flame of civilization that would never go out. It was his legacy. And no amount of forgetting could erase it. Yet, as he walked the free but invisible earth, Prometheus carried with him a bitter truth few heroes know. The truth that the greatest sacrifice often goes unsung. The truth that those who give everything are not always remembered by those who receive. The truth that the loneliness of the forgotten benefactor can be as painful as any physical torture. And this truth, this silent pain of someone who transformed the world and remained anonymous, would echo through the centuries, touching the hearts of all those who recognized a little of Prometheus within themselves. Prometheus' story doesn't end with his liberation. In fact, it's when he gains his freedom that the most painful part of his journey truly begins. Because it's one thing to endure punishment when you know you're being punished for doing what's right. It's another thing to walk free in the world and discover that your sacrifice has been forgotten. Prometheus spent the first years of his freedom visiting the human civilizations that had flourished thanks to his gift. He walked disguised among mortals, observing firsthand the wonders that fire had made possible. He watched blacksmiths forge incandescent metals, creating swords that protected entire cities. He watched potters transform common clay into works of art around their roaring kilns. I watched families gather around campfires on cold nights, telling stories passed down from generation to generation. I watched scholars work by the light of oil lamps, preserving knowledge that would otherwise be lost to darkness. I saw sailors using torches to guide their ships through stormy seas. All of this was a direct result of his decision to steal fire from the gods. Without it, none of it would exist. All of humanity owed its civilization to that moment of courage when a Titan decided to defy Zeus on behalf of mortals. And yet, no one knew his name. Prometheus sat in city squares, listening to the conversations of merchants, artisans, and philosophers. He heard passionate discussions about the origin of fire. Some said it was a gift from the gods. Others believed humans had discovered it by chance when lightning struck a tree. Some invented elaborate stories about human heroes who had conquered fire through impossible feats. But the name Prometheus was never mentioned. His true story had been lost in the mists of time, replaced by vague and imprecise legends. The few who still remembered him did so in distorted ways, transforming his compassion into a reasonless rebellion, his sacrifice into a crime against divine order. The pain Prometheus felt witnessing this oblivion was unlike anything he had experienced during the centuries of torture in the Caucasus. The physical pain had a predictable end each day, but the pain of seeing his sacrifice ignored knew no end. It was a wound that renewed itself with every conversation he overheard, with every poorly told story, every time someone warmed themselves around a fire without knowing who to thank. There were nights when Prometheus wondered if Zeus had planned this all along. Perhaps the true punishment wasn't the torture in the Caucasus, but this eternal wandering in a world that had benefited from his gesture without ever acknowledging it. Perhaps the eagle that devoured his liver every day was merely preparation for this larger, more subtle eagle that now devoured his need for recognition. And then Prometheus began to understand something profound about the nature of true sacrifice. He realized he had given the fire to the men, unconsciously expecting some form of gratitude. Not necessarily worship or temples built in his honor, but at least the recognition that someone had risked their lives for them. He had unwittingly nurtured a small flame of expectation that his kindness would be remembered. But now, walking unseen among those who benefited most from his gift, Prometheus faced the harshest truth of all. The value of a gesture doesn't depend on the recognition it receives. The importance of an action doesn't diminish because it's forgotten. And the true impact of a courageous choice is measured not by the applause, but by the lasting transformation it produces. The fires kept burning regardless of who made them possible. Civilizations kept growing, regardless of whether they remembered the titan who had made it all possible. Knowledge kept spreading, regardless of whether anyone knew the story of who had paid the price for that expansion. Prometheus spent decades struggling with this revelation. Part of him rebelled against the injustice of oblivion. Part of him wanted to shout to the whole world, "I did this for you. I suffered for you. I sacrificed my freedom, my peace, my safety so that you could have all this." But slowly, very slowly, he began to find a different kind of peace. A peace that came not from external recognition, but from the inner certainty of having done the right thing. A satisfaction that didn't depend on applause, but on concrete evidence that the world was better because of his choices. It was a bitter lesson, but also a liberating one. Prometheus discovered that there is a form of heroism that is even purer than the one celebrated. It is the silent, invisible heroism, sustained only by the conviction that one is doing good, even when no one notices. And it was in this process of acceptance that Prometheus found a profound connection with something that had always existed in the human heart, but which few openly acknowledge. The universal experience of giving more than one receives, of doing good without being noticed, of supporting others without being applauded. How many mothers spend sleepless nights caring for sick children without expecting medals for it? How many teachers dedicate years of their lives to shaping young minds, receiving low wages and little social recognition? How many workers keep essential services running, only being noticed when something goes wrong? How many people carry the burden of keeping families together, businesses running, and communities healthy without ever receiving the credit they deserve? How many daily acts of kindness go unnoticed, not because they're small, but because those who benefit become accustomed to them? Prometheus realized he was not alone in his experience. He had become the archetypal symbol of all those who give without expecting anything in return, who sustain without being seen, who sacrifice without being celebrated. And in this understanding, he found not only solace, but renewed purpose. Prometheus's experience teaches us something fundamental about the most important commitments in our lives. They're not the ones we make in public, surrounded by witnesses and applause. They're the ones we make silently, to ourselves, when no one is watching and no one will know whether we keep them or not. Prometheus made his greatest commitment on a lonely night on Olympus, when he decided he could no longer stand by and watch human suffering without taking action. No one forced him. No one applauded him. No one even knew what he was planning. It was a pact he made with himself, based solely on the conviction that it was the right thing to do. These invisible commitments are the ones that truly define who we are. They're the choices we make when no one is paying attention, but they shape our character and determine the real impact we have on the world. And here I want to share something with you. There's a book called The Forgotten Agreement, the 30-day challenge, that explores this very idea. One of the chapters is called A Commitment No One Sees, and it talks about how the most transformative gestures in our lives are those we make without an audience. It's these silent commitments that sustain us when recognition doesn't come, when the applause dies down, when it seems no one notices our efforts. If the story of Prometheus resonated with you, this book could be a practical continuation of this reflection in your own life. The link is here in the video description. But back to our Titan. Prometheus learned that there's a fundamental difference between doing something for recognition and doing something because it needs to be done. The former is fragile, dependent on the approval of others. The latter is as solid as the Caucasus rock to which he was chained. When you act driven by inner conviction, the failure of recognition cannot break your resolve. It may hurt you, it may make you sad, but it cannot destroy you. Because you know, deep down, that you made a difference, regardless of whether anyone noticed. Prometheus walked the streets of cities that had grown thanks to his gift and saw people living better, safer, more prosperous lives. Parents who could protect their children from the cold. Artisans who created beauty with their skillful hands. Scholars who preserved knowledge for future generations. And even if they didn't know his name, even if he was never recognized for it, Prometheus knew he had made a difference. This is a lesson that transcends mythology and touches the reality of anyone who has ever genuinely dedicated themselves to something or someone. How many times have you done the right thing without expecting a reward? How many times have you held on to something important even when no one noticed? How many times have you chosen the hardest path because it was the right one? All these choices have something in common. They arise from invisible commitments we make to ourselves. Commitments to be better, to do better, to contribute in some way to a world that's a little less cold and a little brighter. Prometheus discovered that these invisible commitments are, paradoxically, the most visible of all. Not to human eyes, which are often distracted by what shines on the surface, but to the deep reality of things, to the fundamental fabric of existence. Every time someone chooses to do good without expecting anything in return, the entire universe notices, even if no one else does. The flames glowing in the human fires were silent witnesses to Prometheus's commitment to himself. Each light was proof that his choice had mattered. Each glow was confirmation that his sacrifice had been worth it. Not because anyone was applauding him, but because the transformation was real, tangible, and lasting. And perhaps that is the true measure of the value of our actions. Not the applause we receive, but the flames we light. Not the recognition we earn, but the lives we touch. Not the fame we achieve, but the legacy we leave, even if that legacy is anonymous. Prometheus learned to find satisfaction not in the gratitude of those he had benefited from, but in the knowledge that he had done his part. Not in the love of mortals, but in the love he himself had managed to express through his choices. Not in the eternal memory of his name, but in the eternal permanence of his contribution. He had handed the fire over to the men. The fire still burned. That was enough. But for those of us who still struggle with the need for recognition, who still feel the sting of ingratitude, who still suffer when our efforts go unnoticed, Prometheus's journey offers a path that doesn't eliminate the pain of contempt, but transforms it into fuel for even greater determination. It's the path of those who learn to measure success not by applause, but by impact, not by gratitude received, but by the difference made, not by recognition earned, but by the inner peace of knowing that when you had to choose between easy and right, you chose right. And in the end, when we look back and evaluate a lifetime, what truly matters are not the moments we were celebrated, but the moments we made a difference. Not the times we received applause, but the times we lit a flame that continued to burn long after we were gone. And so we reach the end of Prometheus' story, but not the end of what it represents, because some stories don't end when we stop telling them. They continue to echo, unfold, finding new meaning with each person who listens to them and recognizes something of their own experience. Prometheus never returned to Olympus as a triumphant god. He never had statues erected in his honor in public squares. His name was never sung in hymns of gratitude. He remained as he had chosen to be from the beginning, the silent benefactor, the one who gives without expecting anything in return, who sustains without being seen, who illuminates without seeking the spotlight. And perhaps that's precisely what makes his story so powerful and so timely. Prometheus represents all of us in our moments of greatest generosity and least recognition. He is the mirror in which we can see reflected our own experiences of giving more than we receive, of doing good without being noticed, of carrying burdens others don't even realize exist. How many times have you been someone's Prometheus without even knowing it? How many times have your quiet actions, your unsung gestures, your silent sacrifices made a difference in the lives of people who may never have expressed gratitude? How many fires have you lit that continue to warm hearts even after you've left the scene? The truth is, we all have a little Prometheus within us. We've all faced the choice between doing what's comfortable and doing what's right. We've all felt the temptation to give up when our efforts went unnoticed. We've all carried invisible chains, made not of divine iron, but of unmet expectations, of recognition that never came, of gratitude that remained unexpressed. And the story of Prometheus teaches us that these chains only break when we stop relying on others' approval to validate the value of our actions. When we learn to find satisfaction not in applause, but in the intimate certainty of making a difference. When we discover that the most important flame is not the one others see shine, but the one we keep burning within ourselves. Prometheus gave fire to mankind on a silent night, without fanfare, without witnesses, without hope of recognition. And that fire has never been extinguished. It continues to burn to this day, not only in fireplaces and ovens, but in the hearts of every person who chooses to warm the world around them, even when no one is looking. Maybe you're a teacher and spend hours preparing lessons that inspire your students, even though you know few will recognize the extra effort. Maybe you're a parent and give up your own dreams so your children can pursue theirs. Maybe you're the employee who always stays a little late to make sure everything is perfect, even though you know it will rarely be noticed. Maybe you're the friend who's always there for someone in need, the neighbor who discreetly cares for the elderly on the street, the volunteer who dedicates their weekends to causes they care about. Maybe you're simply someone who tries every day to be a little better, to do a little more, to contribute in some way to making the world less cold and brighter. If you recognize yourself in any of these situations, then you know intimately the path of Prometheus. You know what it's like to carry the silent responsibility of making a difference. You understand the weight of the invisible chains that bind those who choose to care more about impact than recognition. And you too can choose as Prometheus did, to find freedom not in the absence of responsibility, but in its full acceptance. To find peace not in the gratitude of others, but in the certainty that you're fulfilling your role. To find purpose not in applause, but in the flame you keep burning, regardless of who sees it shine. The fire that Prometheus gave to mankind spread throughout the world and has never been extinguished. But perhaps the most important gift he left us wasn't the literal fire. Perhaps it was the example of how to live with dignity, the experience of giving without expecting anything in return, of sustaining without being applauded, of illuminating without seeking the spotlight. Prometheus teaches us that there is a form of heroism that doesn't need recognition to be real, a form of love that doesn't need gratitude to be valid, a form of impact that doesn't need visibility to be lasting. And this lesson, this silent legacy of the chained titan, continues to spread throughout the world, touching the hearts of all those who recognize in it their own struggles and their own quiet victories. It continues to illuminate the path of those who choose to make a difference, even when no one is looking. If this story resonated with you, if you recognize Prometheus as part of your own journey, I invite you to join me in this exploration of the profound truths that ancient myths still have to teach us. Here on this channel, every week, I bring you legends that have spanned millennia to speak about very human and very current pains. If you want to continue receiving these stories that connect the mythological past with the real present, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. And if this narrative resonated with you, let me know in the comments. Share how the story of Prometheus resonates with your own experience. Because in the end, that's what great stories do. They remind us that we are not alone in our struggles, that others have walked similar paths, and that even the quietest sacrifices leave flames that never go out. Prometheus's flame burns brightly. And perhaps the most important flame is the one you carry yourself, the one that lights your path, and the path of all those fortunate enough to cross your path, even if they never know how much you've done for them. This is Prometheus's heritage. This is your heritage too.